All right, joining me for another episode of Kabul'd Together is Kristy Perano, my co-host. Welcome once again.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me.
I know we had like about 20 minutes of tech issues there, so let's just get right into it. There's been a lot of movement in Ukraine. Like we're recording. I think it's our third attempt at a recording since the invasion started. And a lot I think has happened. Putin hoped for a quick, victory. I think with just like within a few days, but he's been bogged down ever since. Um, and the Ukrainians have been resistance has been fierce. And I've heard just today, Russians are completely pulling out from around Kyiv, and they are digging into to the Donbass. And there's been some horrific news out of Mariupol. You want to go over all of that, Kristy?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, the Ukrainian resistance has been really impressive, but that doesn't mean that there isn't, also horrific losses. I mean, the Ukrainians claim at least that the Russians have lost over 15,000 soldiers, but I think the Ukrainian civilian casualties at least are probably at least that high as well. So just like really a mind-boggling amount of destruction in a pretty short amount of time. Yeah, there's been, and now the Russians are kind of, I think because they failed to take Kyiv as they hoped, now they're refocusing on what they claim was their original mission anyway, was to focus on the separatist regions closer to them and not trying to take the capital. But I think that's really just a recalibration because they didn't do as well as they expected. But yeah, and Mariupol, they've just like bombed and killed like thousands of civilians. So I mean, they're estimating at least 5,000 people in that city alone have been killed. So yeah, it is pretty horrific.
Yeah, they've discovered mass graves in the city. Apparently, the entirety of the 18 to 60 male population has been killed. I mean, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. I'm referring to Putin, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember that remark that Biden made. I'm personally of the opinion there was nothing wrong with that remark. The only mistake he made was walking it back.
Yeah, it is interesting that we've now had two successive administrations where the president says stuff that he probably really does mean, and then his administration says, no, the president doesn't mean what he very obviously just said. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, yeah, Putin is horrible. And I mean, I think there's just sort of this desire on the part of the Western world to think that we've like moved past the horrors of World War II and it's never going to happen again because somehow we're in some more like enlightened state. And our technology has obviously advanced, but the fundamental evilness of human nature and the propensity, I guess I would say proclivity to be able to do horrible things, I mean, haven't changed. So yeah, I think it's a mistake for us to take for granted that it's only going to happen in Ukraine, or that these kinds of things can't happen in Europe. And also, I mean, for so long we've been, in the Western world has been pretty dismissive of horrors in the Middle East, and just sort of like somehow it's just okay because it's the Middle East. And I mean, obviously there are some regions that are going to tend to have more peace and prosperity and security than other regions, but part of the reason that Putin is now doing this on European soil is because he got away with these kinds of things in Syria and places like that. And I think for too long, the West has not wanted to deal with Russia, or for that matter, Pakistan or China or Turkey, and all the stuff that they were doing. And so, I mean, part of what's happening is I think we're reaping the consequences of allowing people like Putin to go unchecked, because it was just going to hurt the world economy if we really tried to deal with him. But yeah, it is just, it's mind-boggling like what is going on and how bad this really is.
In some ways, we're returning to I think in the future, what we know as the Cold War is going to be known as the first phase of the Cold War, with the second phase beginning now, and we see like a new Iron Curtain descending upon Russia. You know, people getting cut off from information in Russia, getting cut off from information from outside of the world, and you know, you have planes that are now flying completely avoiding Russian airspace like they did during the Cold War, and there we also you know, you're seeing all these the most brutal sanctions I think that have ever been imposed, completely crippling the Russian economy, and you know, just all these changes that are taking place. And we're going to circle back to Afghanistan. Don't worry, Kristy, we're going to get there. But one of the things I'm thinking about is how this potentially spreads elsewhere. Like the Middle East and North Africa apparently rely on 60% of their wheat imports are from Ukraine, and I think with Russia supplying a substantial amount as well. And if those imports aren't happening, and you have famines that are spreading all across the Middle East and North Africa, the last time I think there was famine in that region was in 2010, and we all know what followed that. So I'm wondering, could we see another round of political revolutions across the Middle East and North Africa?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that you already have famine in Afghanistan, because the Taliban takeover really toppled the economy there. Well, and then basically 80% of their economy was dependent on Western aid, which pretty much dried up. The West just kind of decided to stand down and let the Taliban take over. And they said, oh, now that you have terrorists running your country, we can't give you this aid, which is like 80% of what keeps your country running. So yeah, but even like aside from even the countries that are theoretically better off than Afghanistan, enough to, yeah, if we see we cut off to that area, that could be catastrophic for a lot of countries, not just
Yeah, and you've been talking about what's been happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban has been making some moves in certain regions to ethnically cleanse them. You want to go on about that?
Yeah, well, it is difficult to get accurate intel on what's going on, like in Afghanistan, because the Taliban is controlling all the media. So basically, all the reporters are either sanctioned by the Taliban, or they're in hiding, or they're already dead, or they've already fled the country. So it's not like there's a free and fair press, you know, and like opposing viewpoints. Like at least, I mean, I have my complaints about the U.S. media really on both sides, but at least, you know, you can write a story criticizing the president and not get shot. But same is not true in Afghanistan. So yeah, I would say that, that there has been relatively little information flow out of Afghanistan. I would say that there have been a lot of revenge killings, and the West has really tried to downplay that and pretend that they're surprised that that's happening at all. There have been like more than 100 that have been like verified by the UN, but then that's probably a small fraction of the like revenge killings that actually get verified. The Taliban has tried to keep stuff quiet, so there have been some public executions, but they haven't made a big habit out of just like, you know, publicly executing people in large batches. But they've been behind the scenes. I mean, there are reports of mass graves. I haven't necessarily seen those in the media or like well verified, and part of the problem is that they have such control over people and information flow that there may very well be like big mass graves in Afghanistan, but also anybody who would be a witness to that is going to be murdered if they leak the information. So I believe that there is ethnic cleansing going on, but more of what we see in Afghanistan is just like them targeting, well, I mean, they're definitely targeting US allies, and ethnic minorities, but part of what they're doing is really more of a slow motion, like they're trying to control the aid so that Hazaras and other ethnic minorities don't get any food. So I think more of what they're doing is sort of a slow motion ethnic cleansing, as opposed to like trying to shoot every Hazara person. They're more trying to like starve them. But the world has really done not a whole lot to address the Taliban. And then they say, oh, there's this big humanitarian crisis, so let's send some more money to Afghanistan. And the US like recently announced another $204 million, which is good, but it kind of a small fraction of what's really needed in terms of from a humanitarian perspective. But also we haven't really even seen much discussion of how are we going to make sure that this doesn't just end up feeding the Taliban's extended family. And I know that there are ways that the US is trying, they say that they're trying to work around that. But a lot of these bigger food programs, like the World Food Program or whatever, they're just being administered by the Taliban. And so if you aren't like either part of the Taliban or at least on their okay guy list, then you're not going to be able to participate in that. I have seen family members of like US allies being able to access these programs, but the people that are actually in hiding can't just go and register with their elder to try to get food from the World Food Program. And so yeah, I think it is a bit difficult to know exactly what's going on in Afghanistan just because of the lack of information flow. But what we do know is there have been a lot of target killings of former Afghan military and Afghan allies. There have been reports of targeted killings of minorities, and exactly how many have been like straight up murdered versus starved and denied aid. It's hard to know exactly. But it is really frustrating to see that the whole world has kind of moved on from Afghanistan. And you basically have 40 million people in a concentration camp, and everyone's just kind of like, oh well, I guess we did what we could. And yeah, and there are some ongoing efforts by the US to try to help SIVs leave, but those things will get stopped for weeks at a time. And there are some European countries too that like have some agreements with Pakistan and even Iran to try to facilitate movement out of the country. So there is some of that stuff going on, and but it's all very slow motion, and most countries have a huge backlog of people that worked for them that they have not helped. And obviously vetting is a challenge in that country, both in terms of some people have completely fake documents, others may have mixed alliances, where there are people that work for the US or NATO and work also some sort of double agent. So obviously vetting is needed, but it's extremely frustrating that so much of the world has just decided to move on, and a small fraction of the Afghans that I've been helping for the last several months have made it out of the country. Even the ones that had really solid documents that have a veteran actively vouching for them, most of them are still like in hiding, trying to not get murdered, while the US government is bogged down in red tape, or just nothing is happening.
Or while the world is currently bogged down in Ukraine is more likely.
Right, yeah. And then the other thing that happens is that now a lot of countries are like, oh, let's go save some Ukrainian refugees. But Ukraine's neighbors all just like open their doors. They're like, okay, you're being attacked, like here, just come across our borders en masse. But all of Afghanistan's neighbors just closed their borders because it's like, oh, now there's a big disaster in Afghanistan. Everyone wants to leave Afghanistan. We know what we'll do. We'll just close the borders and trap like 40 million people so that they can't leave. And some of that was Russia. Some of that was Russia's pressure, like for the North. They don't really want a bunch of Afghans spilling into countries that are like part of their security agreement,
like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan.
Yeah, and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Initially, there was a thought that Tajikistan was going to be much more willing to help Afghan refugees, and they've turned out to be not very accommodating at all. Pakistan has always been stirring up trouble in Afghanistan, and Pakistan like supported the Taliban and taking over Afghanistan, and they've actually, Pakistan and Iran have been more open to Afghan refugees than any of the other neighboring countries. I think Iran actually has been even easier to get visas to for Afghans in Pakistan. But Pakistan and Iran are fairly hostile to Afghans. They're just like, they do actually give visas under some circumstances, and basically Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and some of those other countries have just been like, no way, no how are we giving any Afghans any visas. So yeah, I would, so like really all of the northern countries that, all the countries that border Afghanistan to the north are like influenced by Russia and have just been like, nope, nobody is coming here. And some of it is probably just them being afraid of, some of the Afghans could be Taliban affiliated, so there's some of that. And some of it is just them not wanting to deal with having to help with the crisis, so it's easier to just close their border and not deal with it. And so that kind of leaves Pakistan and Iran. But unlike 20 years ago, where Pakistan and Iran both just like hosted large numbers of Afghan refugees, yeah, so there you can see the map. And so a large part of the border is taken up by Pakistan and Iran, but you have, you know, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and really none of those have been willing to. I mean, there are Afghans that have gotten there, but mainly if they already had a visa, like those countries have pretty much stopped any visa processes for Afghans. And Pakistan's visa process has become very expensive and very backlogged and is often denied. And some of them are short-term anyway. So Pakistan has become very difficult unless you're independently wealthy as an Afghan to get to Pakistan. Both Pakistan and Iran have been very aggressive about deporting Afghans there illegally. So unlike 20 years ago, where there were massive flows out of Afghanistan and they were kind of tolerated / hosted by Iran and Pakistan for years, and then later the Taliban was overthrown, and then a lot of those people did, not all, but many of them went back to Afghanistan. But you're not really seeing that this time around. Pakistan already has, I think it's like 1.5 million Afghans or something that they claim they've been hosting, and they don't want more. And I think a lot of that is political. It's not, Pakistan claims it's like all financial and they're doing so much to help Afghans, but they really don't provide public services to Afghan refugees. So a lot of it is just political, that, you know, Pakistan doesn't want Afghans. It's not necessarily a like financial and infrastructure argument like they like to make. But yeah, it just it's very frustrating for those of us trying to help Afghan allies, because the US just has this assumption that they can just live in Afghanistan for however many years they need to get an SIV visa. And a lot of these people are actively being hunted by the Taliban and are like living in hiding and starving. And it's really not a sustainable situation. And then, you know, private groups are hosting them and sending food packages, paying for rent in some cases. I mean, the organization Kurdish Alliance that I'm co-founder and co-president of, I mean, myself and one of the other people there are pretty active in helping Afghans. We have several Afghans in country that we've been assisting, but we're not seeing a lot of movement in terms of getting them out of the country. So we're just like continuing to try to help them survive while they wait for their visas. But it's a very frustrating situation, and everybody, and now all eyes are on Ukraine. So like, we have not been getting a lot of donations, but we still have several families that we're trying to keep alive. So if anybody wants to donate some money to Kana, just about $70 can feed a family for a month. So we would appreciate your consideration if you want to continue to help with the Afghanistan crisis.
Yeah, send me those links in Twitter DMs, and we'll make sure that that gets down in the description of this video. And if you're watching, please, like, you know, donate if you can, because, you know, the eyes are on Kiev, but or on Kyiv, but Kabul is just as important what's going on there. With that said, though, I'd like to turn back just to Kyiv for a little bit, because one of the things I'm wondering is, and I guess I just want, we'll end this like on a more optimistic note. People have made comparisons between you know, like different metaphors for what's happening, like the Second World War and all the horrific things that happened there. What I'm wondering is, could this potentially have an ending similar to that of the Falklands, where the Argentinian dictatorship like invades the Falklands and then gets repelled by the British, and it goes so disastrously for the Argentinians that it results in the fall of the dictatorship and the restoration of democracy? Could this be a Falklands moment for Vladimir Putin?
I mean, it could, I guess I don't have any special insight into the chances of regime change in Russia. I did read that he has like more domestic popularity than at any time in the last 5 years. So I guess the Russians are kind of having, but also who knows how accurate that poll is, or if the Kremlin was hired somebody to cook the books on that. But if true, that sort of means that it's a rally the flag moment for the Russians, like, yay, we're gonna fix Ukraine. I mean, I hope that Ukraine comes out of this stronger. I mean, obviously, it's a huge tragedy and a huge loss, and just like a huge loss of life, but also an amazing effort that they put up to defend their country. And I think that they've really won the respect of the free world that used to see them as just sort of like this corrupt former communist country, and now they are like defending democracy in a way that no Western country has in a long time. So yeah, I do think that I hope that Ukraine comes out of this stronger in terms of like political and probably military and financial support from the Western world for what they've done to defend democracy. But yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope to see regime change in Russia. I don't have any special insight into like how likely that is, and unfortunately, the Russians are afraid enough. I mean, there's probably some combination of fear and gaslighting that has kept them like fairly supportive of Vladimir Putin despite what's going on. I was hoping to see more sort of rebellion in Russia against what was happening than we've seen. But again, just like Afghanistan, if you have a totalitarian regime that's controlling flow of information, it really influences even what information you can get about what's going on inside the country.
Well, people do have Telegram, and if they have relatives in Ukraine, they're hearing different things. I will say, I'm hearing like a very different reaction, like in Russia, within Russia, among the people than the Crimean annexation. I think that there's actually like people are not happy with what's going on. People who are able to get information outside of the Kremlin channels. They hear things and there's protests in Russia itself. And I'm hearing, words like from like way out, east in Siberia, like in Vladivostok, that this is, quote, Moscow's war. So I think there really is discontent about what might be happening in Ukraine, and it's eliciting a far different reaction than the invasion of Crimea did.
Yeah, well, I hope that's true, and I hope there's a growing discontent, and Russians are somehow able to actually know what's going on, and not that this is some sort of legitimate campaign or easy campaign. And yeah, I certainly hope that there's a growing sentiment that this is not a war worth fighting, and that Putin didn't have justification for signing up for this immense cost in life and treasure for Russia.
Anyway, we're going to keep an eye on this. My apologies that it took us this long to actually record. It's been a combination of me being busy with school, Kristy being busy with helping SIVs and Afghan translators, and tech issues. Thank you, Zoom. Please get your stuff together and just make sure stuff keeps working, because we rely on, and it just says right there, my internet connection is unstable as I'm saying this. We rely on your service to make sure that this show can run. So please make sure it's working. So Kristy, like people can follow you on Twitter at Kristy Perano. Is that right? And people can follow me at Red Hill John. Kristy is frozen at this time, but we want to thank you for watching. We're going to keep on this, and we're going to make sure that people stay on top. Oh, you're not frozen now. But thank you so much for watching.